I get a kick out of the anarcho-capitalists. If I were to crack some jokes about it, which, I mean, it's a really sad subject in and of itself, because they basically believe in a make-believe society. They believe that this make-believe society can exist that has never existed anywhere in human history.
Wow, the very first couple of seconds and you've already managed to say something which is both factually incorrect and logically nonsensical. Anarcho-capitalist societies have in fact existed before, and many libertarian societies as well. There's of course medieval Iceland from 900 AD to the mid-13th century, which was an example of a minarchist society, which we'll be touching upon in a second, that of course collapsed in on itself because of its state naturally doing what states do and trying to achieve more power. And of course, Celtic Ireland, which was a full individualist anarchy with no political authority over the entire country and a society being structured around organizations known as tuatha, which, to describe simply, is effectively a private company which served as a jack of all trades for all production of commodities. And what do we know about Celtic Ireland? It was the most prosperous society in all of medieval Europe, with a considerably large population of 1.2 million people, and all of this without legislature, without bailiffs, without public police, and without state law enforcement. Ireland, by the way, remained a successful anarchist society for at least 1,000 years, but some historians speculate, based on the lack of evidence prior to the 1650s that Ireland had a state, that Ireland could have been an anarchist society for up to 9,000 years back when humans were first documented in the area. As for your logistics, you're claiming that it can't exist because you claim it hasn't, and you're claiming that it hasn't existed because it can't. It's an entirely circular line of reasoning.
Nothing ever like it. I mean, for all the failures you can attribute to socialism or communism and all that stuff, it at least has existed.
Yeah, and from what we've seen with individualist anarchy and governments with less centralization, it's produced nothing but prosperity. But even with that aside, assuming that you were right about anarcho-capitalism and individualist anarchism, that it hasn't been tried before, you're taking something which we know is a guaranteed failure, socialism and communism, over something which, according to your understanding, would be a complete wild card. Now, if you're like me and understand the damage that a government does to a market with inflation, monopolization, and regulation that kills competition, I don't need any empirical evidence to know that a laissez-faire anarchist society would be successful, and it would be much better than what we have now. But you have a purely logical choice, and you are intentionally biting the bullet and choosing the one which even you have acknowledged results in failure. What sort of sense does that make? And better yet, why should anyone listen to you if your reasoning will steer them towards failure by your own admission?
What these anarcho-capitalist people talk about has never existed in human history, and it goes against everything in human nature.
There is no empirical human nature. Human nature is subject to change due to environment. This is due to a psychological phenomena known as neuroplasticity. Now, this doesn't mean that human nature is subjective. It means that you will receive different results in instinctual behavior based on the environment that a human is put in. A great historical example, and the most common example used in psychological examination, funnily enough, actually relates to this exact scenario. In the first pilgrim settlements of the United States, formed in Plymouth and Jamestown, they established socialist communal societies. As a result, crime was rampant, people began to starve because of the economic calculation problem inherent in all centrally planned economies, creating shortages, and no one had any incentive to work and provide. They eventually scrapped this failing economic model in favor of a more libertarian free market system, and people immediately began to work harder and efficiently. Commodities were more abundant, and crime dropped drastically. This change actually occurred within a month, when the socialist communal society prior had existed for upwards of 2 years.
Who we are as a species is very conflicted. We have a lot of conflicting urges, perceptions, we whirl over categories.
Yeah, it's almost like that little bit about human nature a second ago was a complete cop-out, and even you know it's total bullshit.
And their idea of society, how would you carry that out? I've talked about this at length.
Well, there are several different ideas for how to abolish the state in a voluntarist libertarian manner. These range from revolution to tax revolts to the least extreme, which is to simply ignore the state altogether, though the most common is counter-economics, which when you use private non-fiat current— why am I even wasting my time? This moron probably doesn't even know the difference between private and government-issued currency. And I'm not going to respond to every one of his ridiculous little straw man memes that ignore the NAP and natural law and pretty much everything that ANCAP stand for. Otherwise, this video would be like an hour long. But seriously, dude, why are you trying to claim that reducing the size of the state to eventually abolish it is a logical fallacy, then show a screen cap defining what the fallacy you're claiming it is defined, and how its definition has nothing to do with the argument that you're trying to dismantle? Either you have the reading comprehension of a 5-year-old, or your competence is on par with your reasoning skills.
But I call them money theists.
Money theists? Well, this just took a turn for the absurd. So many implications, and not a single one of them makes any goddamn sense.
You know how Christians are monotheists and there's other monotheistic faiths like Islam?
Oh, no. No. He's not seriously going there, is he?
Don't try it.
Well, they're money theists, and I've made fun of them. They're the Nuckarema. There's an essay about that.
You had a bucket full of stupid directions you could have gone with this, and you chose the dumbest one. You socialists are actually so fucking delusional that using an understanding of economics, science, and appeal to reason to achieve a vision for how society would or should function is on par with religious fundamentalism.
About cultural anthropology, but these guys are so funny. What would their society look like? Anyway, at least listening to these guys and studying them, it makes me research things. It makes me think of things.
Something tells me that that's quite rare for you, other than the fact that you note it as if it's supposed to be some sort of break from the norm.
And I had to look it up. Did the Wikipedia page, did these, hardcore libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, did they have any society in history that they could point to say that, anarcho-capitalism works? And I saw crazy answers from the Wild Wild West.
There's a great chance that if your example of an ANCAP society is the Wild West, you've never done any actual research, and your source probably isn't an ANCAP who's done no research on the topic either. There were thousands of regulations, mostly tariffs and antitrust laws, very strict immigration policies, and even gun control measures. For instance, the punt gun, which has been fully outlawed or heavily regulated depending on jurisdiction since the mid-1860s.
I picked this one at random, but they said that medieval Iceland had capitalistic features. So I looked up this thing. Actually, it was a governing body that this libertarian scholar said that the Althing in medieval Iceland, and I looked into it some more, and it doesn't sound like it's any more really democratic or capitalist than any other governing body in history.
Your own screen cap shows that no libertarian scholar has referred to Iceland as an ANCAP society, and your presented screen cap also shows how it's different from our current representative republics or parliamentary democracies. Also, ANCAPs do not want democracy. We want individualism. Democracy is a means of forceful coercion which functions in the exact same manner that a state dictatorship does, but with a mob holding the gun rather than an oligarch. ANCAPs and individualists want a voluntary society which functions without the initiation of force or coercion.
Like it says here, the center of the gathering was the Logsberg, or Law Rock, a rocky outcrop on which the law speaker, Logos Magador, took his seat. And basically this guy, they give him all this power. And it's how is that trade? It's not really trade.
Because Iceland's court systems were private and voluntarily funded. The only reason they even had Godders and Logos Magador was because of a majority religious ideological philosophy.
If you look at the Actually, the people of Iceland, they didn't trade with very many people. They were a very insular community. They weren't like the Muslims who traded all throughout the world.
Mainly because their society was located on an island in the middle of the ocean during the turn of the first millennium AD, but as documented by even your own screen caps, there is plenty of historical evidence of trade on the island that was private and voluntary.
Or even Europeans who were starting to really start to trade, a good deal. That's where capitalism would be found, wouldn't it?
Why do you think it would be more likely that you would find voluntary private exchange in the crossfire of medieval colonialist empires having a turf war? Also, why do you assume capitalism can't occur in a small community? Logically, you'd think it would be more likely to function in a smaller community. Given your earlier spiel about human nature, but we all know your attention span's far too short to remember something that you only said a few minutes ago, especially considering that you contradicted it immediately after you said it.
And I call them money theists, and they think that, liberalizing trade, and I've talked about this before, they have neoliberal values. They believe in neoliberalism. They think that all trade should be unrestricted. What about on a global stage? If your anarcho-capitalist thing was, the spooky globalists who really run the country and
Alright, I don't have any idea what the fuck he's even talking about at this point. I think he may have brained a little too hard. Why don't you two take it from here? This video drained me. I'm going to bed.
world and stuff like that. What if they were to try your little anarcho-capitalist thing? Well, it'd be beautiful because they wouldn't invest in big government like they love to, I mean, the corporations pretty much buy out the government, really. I mean, there are districts in the United States, like in Colorado, where they order missiles in that state, and the local economy depends on it, so they make missiles for that, to blow up other people on the other end of the world because they don't like how they're behaving. It's really the military-industrial complex. There are globalistic forces at work, but they're not some kind of cultural Marxist. I mean, people talk about how these ANCAPs and other people talk about how the ruling elite are a bunch of Marxists. They're a bunch of socialist, communist Marxists. Yeah, sure. Karl Marx, he wanted the working class people work. Here's the most famous quote by Karl Marx. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. He talked about how the working classes were going to take over the government. They're going to take over the property. You could have some personal property. You could have stuff on you, but where you worked would be collectively owned by you. It's up for debate how productive that is or not, but that's how communism actually worked, like in Joseph Stalin's Russia and stuff. They collectivized farms, and they put families all in nicer farms some of the time, but they'd be cramped. And it was because that's the way they were going to modernize. Russia was a backwards country with a monarchy, an almost absolute monarchy. There were hardly any, royal people. So the peasantry made up like this astounding number of the population, like 98%, like a really high amount. That's why when someone like Leo Tolstoy, who is a nobleman, when someone's a nobleman in Russia, it means something differently than if you're a nobleman in England, whereas where property was spread out more amongst the elite. That during the Holocaust, I mean the literal Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, a bunch of corporations made a ton of money. Like Volkswagen, the corporation was basically born out of Nazi Germany, I'm pretty sure. Bear Aspirin, I mean, there were IBM, Ford Motor Company. There have been countries that profited off of trade with Nazi Germany. I mean, I get a kick out of the fact when people talk about liberal fascism, as if Adolf Hitler would be totally into gay rights and, minority black people rights and multiculturalism and things like that. really, in conclusion, and talking about all this anarcho-capitalist, socialist stuff, they're really, in some ways, extreme political ideologies. I mean, really, I want to get by for the rest of my life. I just want to live a happy life. I maybe want to be a published author someday or something, but, you know, when it all really boils down to it, I'm just trying to live my life and enjoy it like everyone else. So, thank you for watching. Let's watch some George Carlin.
Rights. Boy, everyone in this country's always running around yammering about their fucking rights. I have a right. You have no right. We have a right. They don't have a right. Folks, I hate to spoil your fun, but there's no such thing as rights, okay? They're imaginary. We made them up, like the boogeyman. The Three Little Pigs, Pinocchio, Mother Goose, shit like that. Rights are an idea. They're just imaginary. They're a cute idea. Cute. But that's all. Cute and fictional. But if you think you do have rights, let me ask you this. Where do they come from? People say, well, they come from God. They're God-given rights. Oh, fuck, here we go again. Here we go again. The God excuse, the last refuge of a man with no answers and no argument. It came from God. Anything we can't describe must have come from God. Personally, folks, I believe that if your rights came from God, he would have given you the right to some food every day, and he would have given you the right to a roof over your head. God would have been looking out for you. God would have been looking out for you. You know that? He wouldn't have been worried about making sure you have a gun so you can get drunk on Sunday night and kill your girlfriend's parents. But let's say it's true. Let's say God gave us these rights. Why would he give us a certain number of rights?